Well, hello, you good people. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us for Keeping It Real. And that's what we're doing. We are keeping it real by reviewing the answers that Leonard Peikoff gave in the book, in the compilation, Keeping It Real, questions that he was asked on his podcast. Good stuff. And I am joined, as always, to get the extra insights, the extra good, juicy goodness out of it with James Valliant. James, how are you doing on this fine Wednesday morning?
Outstandingly well, sir. And I hope things find you the same.
They do. And I'm looking forward to diving in because I'm always interested because I've had a long and storied career, and we may talk a bit about that today. I'm always interested in questions about career, about getting the job done. And you have chosen questions from the book on exactly that theme. And this is going to be good. I'm going to jump right in. But first, let me say, folks, if you're watching live, thank you. Appreciate that. And put in your comments, share them with us in the chat. Let us know what's on your mind. But also, if you put them in as a super chat, support the ARCUK, your comments will stand out. And don't your comments deserve to stand out? Yes, they do. So thank you to all of you who are supporting us, whether live or after the fact with your super thanks, or simply by becoming members of the Ayn Rand Center UK. Link is at the top, aynrandcenter.co.uk. And then let me jump right to the first question, because Leonard Peikoff was asked this in the Fountainhead. So I love that we're starting with a question that both talks about career and the fiction. In the Fountainhead, Roark wants to create. In order to create, does he care what happens to his work after that? Interesting question, and you can sort of see why it would be asked. There are scenes in the Fountainhead, for example, during the building of Monadnock Valley, where Stephen Mallory is suspecting something's wrong, and Howard Roark says, look, even if they take all of this away from us, wasn't it worth it? So I get the question. I can see why Leonard Peikoff was asked this. Does he care what happens to his work after that? But Leonard Peikoff answers, and I'll give just the beginning because I want to talk about this. Yes, of course he cares. But what happens is secondary. Now, that's a consequence of what he does. It is not the essential. It's not the motive that moved him. Well, if he didn't care, then all he would do is draw the blueprints. He wouldn't care that much about the building. His whole way of approaching it was that, well, there's a problem, a possibility that he sees, but agony in trying to put it all together. In the Fountainhead, Ayn Rand described the creative process as a combination of torture, sexual ecstasy, and religious sacrament. And you have to struggle within that to solve the problem and see the product. I love that. That brings to mind the scene right away when Austin Heller is talking to Roark. Don't you ever slow down? You treat architecture like it's this combination of torture, sexual ecstasy, and religious sacrament. And Howard Roark's answer is, isn't it? Isn't that what it is? So Leonard Peikoff goes on, while you are creating, you do not think of such questions as, whether it's going to be taken over by Tui or going to become a home for subnormal children or whatever. If that sounds a little out of context, folks, you need to read the novel.
Fountainhead, yeah.
Yeah. If you think the project is something you want to exercise your faculty on, and you're not living in a dictatorship, so there's a possibility. Well, you don't even think of that. You think of solving the problem and of what the work requires. Take a break here from Dr. Peikoff's answer, but yeah, right away you think, well, to get things done, you must love the doing, one of the lessons of the Fountainhead.
Very much so. If we were, we're objectivists. If we were Stoics or Buddhists, and all we cared about was our peace of mind, without respect to the conditions of the world that we live in, I suppose that our focus would be, the blueprints are satisfactory. Who would need anything more than the blueprint? If all I need is my inner contentment, as the Stoics and the Buddhists say. It's not about real world consequences. No, principles are not ends in themselves. Philosophy is not an end in itself. They are instruments, they're tools for living, successful living. And philosophy is all about successful living. Now, it is absolutely true that having the correct philosophy will insulate you, and no matter what the circumstances, if you've done your best job and you knew you were doing the right thing, even if it doesn't work out, you'll be happier than had you not had the principle. So the principle, being a philosophical person, will insulate you from a good degree of suffering and make you content, regardless of the outcome. But the point is, you're content only if you had an outcome in mind and you were doing the best you could to get that outcome. The ideas are not just an end in themselves. Howard Roark needs to see the building up and built. In the blueprint, the key here is that the blueprints are not satisfactory. Sure. Can he assure, now forget even Ellsworth Toohey and the people who might corrupt and destroy his buildings or put a classical facade in front of them or something. To Dominique, of course, big spoiler alert, the very idea of someone hanging their dirty laundry in front of the Stoddard Temple, for example, is horrifying. It's a sacrilege, because she views the creative process very much like Howard Roark does, in a sacred way. That is, in that respect, a sacred way. And so to her, it is a sacrilege. Should anyone deface or put graffiti on a Howard Roark building, that would be unbearable to her, absolutely unbearable to her. And she'd rather not even see that happen to the building or to Howard Roark. Howard Roark has a much different attitude about the consequences, it is true, but he still needs that building built. Did he build it so that it would have graffiti on it and people could hang their dirty laundry? No. Would he prefer it so that people gave it the proper respect and appreciation? Of course. But can he guarantee that an earthquake won't happen and damage one of his buildings in the future? Forget Ellsworth Toohey and the human factor here. The truth is there are circumstances, and some of them are beyond our control, beyond even the control of a genius like Howard Roark. And Howard Roark is well aware of that. But there is no question there is a relationship between being good at what you do and loving what you do. You got to love the doing. And
Yes.
that comes from the inside. His motivation, as Dr. Peikoff points out, is his own joy in the doing.
Let me read then, apropos of what you've said, Leonard Peikoff, the second half of his answer, because he says, without boasting, I have to say that is exactly the way that I've always worked. For instance, take OPAR, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, is his book. That was my life's mission. From the time I met Ayn Rand to organize her life philosophy step by step and present it in a book. Of course, I'm glad that people buy it and people thank me and say it helps them and so on. But quite honestly, that never entered my mind when I was writing it. The only thing in my mind was, well, I don't understand this point. I've got to get it once and for all. Okay, now I see the connection to this, but what about that? Only that. Then after it was over, and I'm still not convinced how many people are helped by it. I'm glad if they are, but that was not the creative motivation. Let me pause for a second and say, I know many people who were helped by it. I hope that Dr. Peikoff over time has become more confident in the impact that that book has had. And it's really hard to overstate the what I think it means to have systematized the philosophy in a single volume.
Yes. I have to agree with Dr. Peikoff here from my own personal experience. I wrote a book called Creating Christ, which I don't think is, and I'm going to say this, objectivists are always a little squeamish about modesty as a subject in general, but I'm going to express, I think, the correct degree of modesty. My book on Christianity is about 1,000 times less important than OPAR and in its effect on the potential effect on the world. Dr. Peikoff helped me with OPAR in a profound and fundamental way. But Creating Christ, I figured, wow, thank you. Creating Christ, I figured, wouldn't have an impact in my lifetime. I honestly did not think they would make a documentary of it. I honestly did not think that I would get the praise from the scholars that I have gotten, or the sales of the books that I have got. I thought that maybe in 100 years or so, someone would dust it off and say, oh, maybe this guy had a point. It was figuring it out. As Dr. Peikoff says, it's getting the right formulation. understanding what I'm saying and why I'm saying and what the truth is here. Figuring it out was the end. So that when I held, like you just held the book in your hand, when I held it in my hand for the first time, I felt completion. That was it. That was my goal. My goal was to get this out there, to understand it, and to make it available. And once that happened, I had this Howard Roark Zen that came upon me. I had accomplished what I wanted to do. I had accomplished my end. My joy in it is mine forever and can't be taken away, no matter how anyone reacts to the darn book. So I have to agree, I've had a very, very similar experience. It took me 30 years to write that book. 30 years. That's true, I was doing other things, but it was a long-term goal for me to understand and then coherently present that understanding in a way that people could get it. Now, I think this is true. I think this is true across the board. To love the doing is critical to making sure that the output is quality. There's a relationship between our loving of the doing and how well we do it. There's no question about it. Were I to have written the book with other people in mind, I would have written a big fat book that took into account people's feelings, and I would have held their hands, and I would have spoon-fed them in certain psychological ways. No. I had the respect for the reader that they would be able to integrate the evidence that I presented, just like I integrated the evidence. But they weren't the goal. Now, think about it. A book, what is the point of a whole book? Is to communicate. And yet, even that book, take the Fountainhead, the whole point of a book is to communicate something to someone. And yet, Ayn Rand would have, I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts here, that Ayn Rand would have had the same exact attitude that Howard Roark did about the Fountainhead, about his buildings. Ayn Rand would have had about the Fountainhead. It existed. It was written. It was out there. Not the potential effect that it might have on other people. Not that that's irrelevant, but that's not our motivation. Was she pleased that the Fountainhead was a top seller? Yeah. I mean, can you imagine how proud she'd be? You know, my gosh, I'm on the New York Times bestseller list again this month, and Jack Warner wants to buy the movie rights to my novel. She must have been thrilled at that practical outcome, but that wasn't her motive.
Right. Right. Now, Leonard Peikoff wraps up his answer saying, well, maybe if I was aiming for a bestseller, I would have been more concerned. But in the kind of creative work we're talking about, well, that's not applicable. I saw OPAR in effect as being like a cosmic crossword puzzle. I love that expression. A cosmic crossword puzzle, and my goal was to solve it. Then if somebody wanted to frame it or pay for it, well, that was a separate issue. Now, you know, you very modestly, and I'm not questioning your analysis, but you're very modest about the relationship of creating Christ to objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. And yet at the same time, I've got to say the first book is important because the Bible and Christianity is one of the things that stands in the way of people getting to this book. So, yes,
well, that's exactly how I view it. That's exactly how I view it. I think that we have to unmask the alleged moral idealism behind Christianity. And it was an accidental outcome of figuring out the origins of Christianity that I backed into that, and I realized, whoa, what we've just done is we've causally explained, at least in the case of Christianity, where its extreme form of altruism comes from. And it helps to unmask when you consider those origins, the relationship. Now, comparing that to OPAR, though, to be fair, OPAR has the potential to have 100,000 times the impact of creating Christ. Once the world gets past the error of Christianity, my book will be a footnote. Once the world accepts objectivism, that will continue to be a textbook.
I mentioned our trip to Japan. One of the interesting things about going to Tokyo, a city that is kind of beyond belief. The metropolitan area has 22 million people in it, and it's a beautiful city. And there are, from the old days primarily, temples and shrines, but the thing that stood out is there's no churches. There's no Christianity. And I thought, imagine the United States like that. Imagine if the road was cleared if people could understand that Christianity is a development in history, if they could understand that if we're going to teach religion in schools, it should be part of the history courses, not religion per se. And once people can take it that way, what a difference that's going to make in the United States. And that's why, again, I'm never going to sell this book short.
Well, thank you very much.
It is a part of that project.
I regard it as part of that project for sure. I don't know if Ayn Rand would have, I can't speak for her, and it's certainly a subject that objectivists can reasonably discuss and debate among themselves. It's not the equivalent. Now, I happen to think it's important, and most of the time when I'm selling the book to objectivists or secular group atheists, I have to do my major work in convincing them why they should even consider the subject. And hopefully one day I will lose those arguments and there'll be no need to consider the subject. That's in effect my goal.
Yeah. I mean, half the power is just getting people to realize, oh yeah, there's a reason this came up. And it wasn't cosmic, it wasn't a burning bush, it wasn't a virgin birth. It was just a historical development. Exactly. And can be understood that way. So yes, good stuff. I've got to give a shout out to Jeff Bannister, who is in with a super chat. Thank you for that. Very much appreciated. So that's awesome. And anybody else listening live or after the fact, because super thanks are also an option, by all means, put in your support for the Ayn Rand Center UK, or just say hi to us. Very much appreciated. Let me jump to question number 2, because we're talking about getting the job done. We're talking about career. Is it wrong? Is it wrong to put off college work, especially writing essays, until the last minute? Is that avoiding reality now? How many of us, particularly people like me, that kind of, fairly bright but introvert and sometimes a little scattered for that reason, and that feeling of I can be really productive when I'm meeting a deadline? So Leonard Peikoff, reads his first part of his answer, he says, no, I think it's most likely recognizing reality. In other words, college reality. I'm not saying that you should do this, but I am saying, well, delay until the last minute gives you something priceless if you're in a situation you can't tolerate. Well, it gives you a deadline, forcing you to move, motivating you so that you do the paper. If you have simply a generalized goal, I want to be a lawyer, I want to learn biology, or whatever. Well, that does not have the motivating power, if you're in a corrupt institution, that the following would have. Get it in by Friday or you're dead. And then Leonard Peikoff goes on. I lived through deadlines throughout college as the only way I could get through. This was a common procedure. The paper would be due at 10 a.m. the following morning, say Friday. I would start at 7 p.m. on Thursday, work all night, try to catch the 9 a.m. subway and get the paper into the office just before 10. My papers were not good, but I didn't care about them being good. They were enough to get me the grade. The teacher wouldn't know or care anyway. Stopping the Leonard Peikoff quote there again. If you know the state of the humanities in many colleges these days, and even back when Leonard Peikoff was studying his graduate degree, this makes much more sense. If you're not as aware that, or if you happen to have good teachers, and there are some out there, you might be thinking, well, why is he shortchanging himself? Why isn't he going for the good grade versus just getting the script, getting the degree? Going on a bit more with Leonard Peikoff, let me add that even when you're doing work you like and that you've chosen, the deadline can be very motivating. For instance, well, I have a lot of trouble writing, and I have no publisher with a contract. It's sometimes irresistible to say, I just can't stand it anymore. But if you sign a contract and you get an advance and say it's got to be in on January 1st, and you don't feel like working, you just remind yourself of the deadline, and it helps you to push you in. You might say, if you procrastinate like that, it's a way of life in college. Well, doesn't it necessarily become a life trait? And then he finishes up saying, no, I don't think it does at all. I'm not a procrastinator in general now. except when I find writing too difficult. But I was a tremendous procrastinator in college. Well, I totally feel that, especially when it's a have to do and not a want to do. Now, Jean Maroney, per the interview I had with her week before last, would say, there are no have to do's. There's nothing you have to do. Everything is a want to do if you understood it properly. But let's face it, for some goals we want to achieve, you are up against deadlines that are not necessarily rational. So even if they are in your interest, if they are obstacles you've got to overcome. So I totally get what Leonard Peikoff is talking about here.
Yeah, you know, here you are studying philosophy at New York University, like Leonard Peikoff was, and you've been assigned to do, let's say, a paper on Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the grimmest pessimistic reads in the whole of the history of philosophy. And your task is to write a paper explaining the, ideas of Arthur Schopenhauer. It would be a miserable task for me. And in fact, I was a philosophy student at New York University, and I did have to write a paper on Arthur Schopenhauer, and it was a miserable process for me. Now, is it something that I wanted to do because I wanted to get the degree? Absolutely. So it was, in that sense, something I wanted to do. That's why I did it. That's what gave me sufficient motivation to do it. But the doing of that task was sort of like, some grim preliminary.
Especially if you're not writing a critique, if you're just supposed to present an aspect of the philosophy straight. I mean, imagine, well, you don't have to imagine, you did it. If you had to write a paper on the moral system of Soren Kierkegaard,
right?
Oh my God, into the swamp.
Into the swamp, right? Or the ethical approach, the intrinsicist approach of Kant and the subjectivist epistemological approach of Kant. It's just utterly. Just having to read Kant is a miserable thing to have to do. I pity anyone who has to read Kant or Hegel, because it's just an unbearable process mentally to go through. But if what you want is that degree in philosophy, you got to. And if I have to hold my nose to do it, I will do it. And there are sometimes in life parts of a task which are hold my nose so I can get it done. I mean, you think about Ayn Rand's own career. She had lots of jobs before she made it with writing and became very successful with writing. She had lots of jobs she did not enjoy, jobs that were miserable, jobs that were merely a stone quarry. Readers of the Fountainhead will get the analogy here. Not barely related to what you're doing, but something you just have to do right now to get the future you want. And sure, I agree with the idea that if it's part of my long-term goal, it should be something, you see, that I see as part of what I want. Yeah, of course. In that sense, I got to do this, so I want to do it. But sometimes that doing is miserable.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny because, and you tell me what you think, James. I sometimes use the common expression, pay your dues. You've got to be willing to pay your dues. And I've run into objectivists who interpret that in a malevolent universe sense. Whereas I always heard it more in the, take what you want and pay for it sense. Do you think that's necessarily a malevolent expression? A man's got to pay his dues?
No. If I were to prescribe what you're going to have to pay, then it might be malevolent. Oh, there'll be misery every time, and there'll never be the joy at the end of it. That would be a malevolent universe. If I say to myself, no, it's part of the task, and it is part of the cause and effect of getting the outcome. Again, I keep going back to this. Well, if you haven't read Ayn Rand's essay, Causality versus Duty,
yes.
I highly recommend it. Working hard to achieve a long-term goal, paying the appropriate price for the highest value. The highest values are the most rare, the most difficult to achieve. It's not going to be easy if what you're after is a really high outcome, really high goal, really high value. it's going to take effort. It's going to take time. And some of that effort may not be pleasant, maybe hard work. But I have to say, coming back to procrastination, that hard work is not something that prevents me from doing the work. College, I think, is a unique case where the intermediate task in front of me, like writing the paper on Arthur Schopenhauer, is going to be unpleasant. It's not going to be like that when I'm, for example, writing my book, Creating Christ. That was almost exclusively a fun, even if it was difficult, even if there were problems to solve, I enjoyed the process of doing it thoroughly. And every aspect of it, I enjoyed thoroughly. Unlike, say, having to go to college when, yeah, that deadline was one of the main motivators, as opposed to, I love doing this work.
Right.
When I was writing Creating Christ. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. I want to give a shout out to Free Trade. YouTube user Free Trade is in with a super chat. Thank you very much for that. Both Jeff and Free Trade gave them in the form of stickers. So no questions, but your support, maybe it's even more appreciated that way because all you are doing is showing some thanks and recognizing the ARCUK. Thank you for that. Keep it coming, folks. And let me jump to question number 3. And this is one that I wonder about, sort of a pun having been in the IT field, but is networking, in order to get the upper hand in landing a job, a secondhand activity? And Leonard Peikoff starts his answer by saying, no, I don't think it is, not today. In many fields, and I happen to know the field of publishing, there are a great many people in the field, and you have to find the one or two who can connect you to the one you need. Without that network, it's almost impossible if you know nobody. And he says more, but I thought that was good. That was good to get that out there because given what we run into as objectivists, a lot of the second-handedness and dishonesty, it's all too easy to think, well, this is essentially a corrupt field, and therefore if I succeed, there must be something corrupt about me. If I make friends in the field, if I'm willing to have lunch with a publisher, if I'm willing to deal with people at all, and there's a real malevolence, I think, that not to accuse anybody, but there's some of that out there, don't you think?
Yeah. We're individualists, but we're not opposed to friendly interaction and working with someone. It's almost a bizarre false alternative and package deal that's being presented there. Becoming friendly with people in my field who I respect is part of doing the job. No, I'm not dependent on them, in some sort of a second-handed way. And it really matters who it is with whom I'm networking. I wouldn't be networking with Ellsworth Tuohys, but you can sort of see this in the Fountainhead too. Howard Roark is not opposed to having, it's his personal relationship with, say, Stephen Mallory that leads to their professional relationship. And of course, it's going to happen. Building trust is important when you're working with someone. Working with people you can respect is important. Dividing up a task so that, Robert, you'll do this part and I'll do that part. My ability to trust you, I wouldn't just trust anybody with this if I was serious about the project. I'd find someone I trusted, someone I knew who could handle that aspect of the job. And my confidence in you would be an important part of my end of the task as well. Just as your confidence in me would be an important part of your end here. No, we can work with other people, and it seems bizarre. This is part of the way individualism and egoism have presented in the past, of course. It's atomized individualism, and we're all living on desert islands all by ourselves. And isn't that what individualism consists in? No, it is not. Working with other people the value of that certainly depends on a whole lot of conditions. But when it happens, those conditions are really the ideal state. I've found a group of people with whom I can work. I've found a customer base, a client base. You pick it with the job you want. I've found a group of people with whom I can work and interact is a value, a high value. And it's a shame that people have tarred egoism and individualism with this notion that other people, oh, you're an individualist, and other people can't matter to you in any way, professionally, personally, in any way. You're out there all by yourself. Well, no, that is not what objectivism advocates.
Right. Yeah, Yaron Brook in particular has been pushing benevolence lately in ways that have been inspiring. And he will remind us trade implies you're trading with someone. The way I put it is my favorite 3 C's of capitalism, besides capitalism itself, are, and all 3 of these are required. Don't tell me you're pro-capitalist if you don't respect all 3 of these: creation, cooperation, competition. And so many people think capitalism, that means competition. Well, what about actually the production, the creation? And what about division of labor and economies of scale and trading your strengths? And capitalism is not you against the world. It's you and the world, or at least the producers.
You know, one thing that Atlas Shrugged really brings out, and one aspect that really makes it wonderful, you know, Atlas Shrugged is a follow-up to the Fountainhead, is that it shows you, Ayn Rand is showing you, depicting dramatically how the key virtue of the businessman, businesswoman, in the case of Dagny Taggart, are in fact organizers of humans. It is the businessman may not be the scientist or the inventor. In the case of, say, Hank Rearden, he was an inventor, but he may not be the scientist and inventor, but he is the one who organizes things such that the product becomes a sellable product. We engage in business with it, and to do that, you have to organize people. And it's a really amazing thing that we think of capitalism as competition, but not the cooperation part, as you point out, when the cooperation part is at least as important as the competition part. And that is precisely what business people do. They coordinate human activity to a certain end. And to do that, you've got to organize your employees, you've got to reach out to customers, etc. It's all about connecting with humans. Business is about connecting with humans, providing a value that they are willing to exchange a value for in this win-win trade. It's the opposite of being on a desert island. It's finding valuable, win-win, productive interactions. And that involves both competition, of course. You can't say that it's just cooperation, because then you'd say, well, what if someone has a new idea? What if someone wants to do a product and he can do it cheaper, better, etc. Of course, that competition is obviously a part of capitalism, but the part that people don't get is the cooperation part, or perhaps even most importantly, your first C, the creator part. That's what capitalism is all about, is taking this new idea, this invention, this scientific discovery, and making it relevant to the lives of human beings, to the masses. That is exactly how capitalism has so dramatically improved the lives of everyone on this planet, practically, since the Industrial Revolution has occurred. Ordinary people are living better in the West than Louis XIV or pharaohs did in the past, or ever could have conceived of living. Ordinary people in the capitalist, semi-capitalist, mixed economies in the West, at least, live better than the richest people of the past. Why? Yes. Why? It's because of the coordination of human activity that capitalism made possible.
Yes. Yes.
It's a social system that we're advocating with capitalism.
You're so right. In objectivism, in philosophy, we respect the great minds. We respect the scientists, the inventors, the innovators. But, you know, both in her essay, What is Capitalism? And in the Fordall Forum speech, America's Persecuted Minority, Big Business, she makes the point that for all that we have great scientists and innovators, who are the people who bring that to us, who bring it down to reality, who actually take those ideas and then produce based on them, who make it possible for all of us to enjoy those innovations. It's a brilliant point that she makes. And she also makes the point that, well, but who are the last people that, as you know, culturally we respect? The businessmen? They're just, you know, chasing dollars and practical, but they're not the idealists. They're not the ones we should revere. They're not the ones we should respect. Yeah, America's persecuted minority.
Exactly. In Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand describes Dagny Taggart as a prospector of humanity, for human souls. She is looking for human diamonds out there. And the story sort of begins with her being disappointed, spoiler alert, about Owen Kellogg, because she's always looking for competent people or the right person or and she's a railroad executive. So she's got to know where business is productive in the country, how to supply the businessman over here, because that is a critical part of the economy, and that needs to coordinate with this part of the economy. Making the central character a railroad executive was brilliant on her part, because it connects Dagny to all these other business people on whom her business depends. Ayn Rand makes the point, and made the point in her last speech, that the ancient Greeks knew about the steam engine. Only they were toys for kings and or tricks for the religious hucksters out there. The steam engine only made a difference to the lives of ordinary people because business people were able to profit. I'm going to say it just that nakedly. Only because business people were able to profit and were free enough to profit from making this available to the masses. It is only a system of property rights, a system of, to the degree that you can have it, a system of free capitalism that makes possible the relevance of the steam engine to the masses. And the critical people who are the intermediary here are the business people. They are the ones who actually make it, in a sense, more important than the scientist or the inventor. But for the businessman, the steam engine would still be irrelevant to humanity and would be living in conditions of the past.
Yes. You're so right. You're so right to bring up Dagny Taggart as a prospector, as somebody who's because she recognizes the value of Reardon metal. She recognizes industrial values, but even more than that, she recognizes the people who make it possible. And she discovers the Owen Kellogg's, but also Quentin Daniels, or in one of the most heartening stories, just a bum, Jeff Allen on the train. And she realizes, no, this is a man who still has self-respect and a mind. And she puts him in charge of the abandoned train. So yes, it's not a dichotomy between the production and people. No, and so good.
Another spoiler alert, Hank Rearden, the inventor of Rearden metal, knows, in fact, the important role that Dagny Taggart and the John Galt line will play for his metal. He's facing all kinds of resistance for his new metal. It's untried, it's dangerous, for every my goodness. Dagny Taggart is the businesswoman that takes the risk of using Rearden metal to build a railroad, to show the world the power and potential of it. She knows it will work. What's going to keep the bridge from collapsing? My judgment.
Yes.
God, I love that. And Hank Rearden is acutely aware that it is his cooperation with Dagny Taggart and the John Galt line that will make Rearden metal successful. He has to work with other business people. He has to work to impress the customers out there, the potential customers of Rearden metal. He's not living on a desert island somewhere.
Yes, trade. Well, let me speaking of trade, I've got to give a huge shout out to Free Trade, who is in with another super chat, a very generous one, and says, being a huge procrastinator myself, I find the best solution to work you resist doing is to get started and just do a small portion of it. And repeat until the entire thing is done. It usually goes faster than you think. Well, thank you for that, Free Trade. And, maybe you've been studying some of the works of Gene Moroney or other motivational coaches. It is a great technique. I use the 10-minute version of it myself. If there's something you don't want to do, and this is a little different, but give yourself permission in advance to just stop after 10 minutes.
Right.
And sometimes you'll do that. You'll do 10 minutes and you'll decide, yeah, this is not the time for it. But usually what happens is once you give yourself an honest 10 minutes, you think, okay, I can do 10 more and I can do a half hour. And, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. It's when it comes to procrastination in college work, it was as if I was avoiding an anxiety attack.
Ooh,
My motivation, yeah, getting to the point of putting it off to the point where, well, I need to do it now, otherwise I'm going to have a full-on panic attack. Whereas if we're doing something that we actually, see the end of, but don't necessarily enjoy every aspect of the doing of, it's not to avoid an anxiety attack or panic attack. It's
right.
actually giving myself the permission to, like you say, to have a context. I put 10 minutes into it and I say, well, this isn't the right time for me now. But as you say, and this is what I find to be the truth more times than not, once you get in, you're sucked in. Oh, no, now I have to, now I have to, no, well, that leads to that. And you get sucked in by the doing.
Yes, yes. Now, lest anybody think any of these methods are pragmatic, the thing I love about the 10-minute idea, for example, is you're not lying to yourself at all. You know in advance, yes,
Right.
this might make me want to do more. I'm not trying to fool myself. It's simply an effective method. But question number 4 is, I'm passionate about traveling and exploring new places, and I have an adventurous spirit. It is for these reasons, and not because of altruism, that I am interested in joining the Peace Corps. Is this proper? Now, before I give Dr. Peikoff's answer, James, I assume you know what the Peace Corps is, but maybe a lot of people nowadays don't.
Well, it is a
The-
60-year-old program of the federal government, which would round up young people who wanted to volunteer their time to work overseas to help out in various ways with poverty, with developing some undeveloped land for some impoverished third world country, but sending you to some ghastly hellhole around the world to help out humanity, as if your volunteer work is really the key to lifting these people out of poverty. It is, of course, based on altruism. It's a government project that collected its resource funds by force. And it makes, as I say, the assumption that this kind of charity is what's going to make the difference to foreign aid, however you want to look at it. It's a foreign aid program. This kind of foreign aid will make the difference and will lift. That's the way to lift these people out of poverty. Total altruism and total collectivism in its implications, obviously. That's what the Peace Corps is. Started by John F. Kennedy way back in the early 1960s, I believe. But it was young people being sent overseas to do altruistic work, helping the poor in other places.
yeah, and to be clear, they're explicit about the altruism. They're explicit about sacrifice for those needy, for those who have less than you, for those who are in dire straits that you'll never see in your lifetime.
As I've observed many times, it is Henry Ford's for-profit activity which had more to do with raising living standards for people around the world than all of the charity put together in human history. Charity is not the way, foreign aid is not the way you're going to lift people out of poverty, even if that's your goal. Not going to happen that way. It's only by means of for-profit activity that's going to even create a stable circumstance in which you could have growth and prosperity that we've seen in the West. So it's a fundamental economic error, but it's even deeper. It's a fundamental ethical error. It fails to understand something fundamental about human nature. Let me put it that way. There's nothing wrong with wanting to travel and be adventurous. Oh, that's a great thing. Loving to travel and to be adventurous, that's a super value. Surely there's some other way that you can express that value other than the Peace Corps.
Well, the point has been made repeatedly that people like Bill Gates, before he became a humanitarian, did far more for the poor people and everybody else in the world than a Mother Teresa. And some people will point to Mother Teresa's hypocrisy, her own writings that indicate she didn't really believe in God, her work in which she would help ease the pain and suffering of people, but not actually help them to get better or to come out of poverty. And what I would say is that even if she had done that, she still would have been nothing on the scale of actually helping individual human beings compared to a Bill Gates, compared to a Jeff Bezos, compared to the innovators who make the machines and the medicine and the opportunities and the businesses possible that help bring people out of poverty.
People will point to, the Red Cross, and they'll say, well, look at those people with the Red Cross there at every disaster and every moment when people need help, some terrible fire happens, some earthquake happens, and, the Red Cross will, mobilize, go into action, send out volunteers. Now, what made the Red Cross possible? In a pre-capitalist context, nothing like the Red Cross could have been possible. There was no such thing as the Red Cross before capitalism because people couldn't afford the Red Cross before capitalism. In fact, it was wealthy capitalists who originally funded the Red Cross and created it. So I don't want to dismiss all charitable activity. No, it can be productive and it can be a fine thing. But for the for-profit activities of those wealthy millionaires who originally funded the Red Cross, there'd be no Red Cross.
Right.
And at the end of the day, their for-profit activities actually did have more to do with increasing living standards than the Red Cross did. The Red Cross was really just a bandage, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah, and because they handle emergencies, I'm good with that. I mean, you can read the ethics of emergencies and you realize that changes somewhat the calculation there. But then again, I'm biased because I gave blood this week. So I love the American Red Cross, even though I have criticisms. It's funny, they're trying to find loopholes around one of their basic policies is they don't pay. They don't pay for blood. And they're starting to work with other, for example, Amazon will send a gift card to blood donors. So they're kind of figuring out a way that maybe a little bit of trade would be a good thing. Maybe if you don't let it be selfless, because I certainly don't feel that it's selfless when I donate blood. I'm putting blood into a system that I know someday I'm going to need to get mine back. And we could have a whole discussion about that. But Let me real quick give the rest of, or at least the start of Leonard Peikoff's answer. I think you pretty well handled this. When he was asked, is this proper? Join the Peace Corps, but I have reasons. Leonard Peikoff says no. You judge an activity or a course of action by the essence of what you're doing, not by the perks that come on the side. The essence of joining the Peace Corps, the purpose of what it declares is promoting altruism. Therefore, by your actions, in reality, regardless of what your inner thoughts or motives are, you're simply making it a bit easier for them to say, you see what we've accomplished? You see how many people we have? You see the different walks of life our people are from? You're giving them that assistance. Now, the fact that you can explore, travel, and so on, it's not a validation. Otherwise, you could have done in 1930. Well, if the communists had come to you, say you wanted to experience traveling as an engineer, but you couldn't find it in this country. Well, they say, oh, we've got a lot of plants, factories in Soviet Russia, especially in Siberia. We will pay for everything, and you get to build the buildings. And you say, well, I'm taking the job not to help communism, but because I want to travel and enjoy the engineering, and I'm oblivious to the consequences. And he wraps up by saying, well, that's a more extreme example, but it is the same example. Yeah, I think there's a point at which you've got to take some responsibility for the organizations you choose to work with. And a lot of organizations are mixed. You could even argue that the Peace Corps does some good things, but they are an explicitly altruist organization. And they've been responsible for some very, very bad things precisely because of that motive.
Yeah. You can't lose your principles. Principles are instrumental, as I said earlier, but principles are vital and the consequences are vital. And there's a relationship between being consistent with our principles and the consequences that we're after. You can't ignore the consequences of, say, joining the Peace Corps just because you selfishly want to travel and enjoy adventure and want to visit Africa and South Asia or something. And so therefore you join the Peace Corps. No. You have to understand. In fact, you have to take into account the effect, the consequence. Consequences matter. It's true, Howard Roark was happy when the building was built. And anything that happened to the building thereafter would not affect that pride that he had in the joy of the doing and the pride in the outcome. But he was aware of the consequences. The blueprints weren't enough. He was aware of what he was building. He was aware of what he was building. Now, he could build a housing project for the poor, and he could make it possible to have cheap housing. Again, spoiler alert, for those who know, they'll know what I'm talking about. It would be a challenge to him to create a housing project that would be affordable to the poor. So he's helping the poor in effect. But as readers of the novel know, he accepts no money. He doesn't even want the credit for it. He just wants to build it. But he's not unmindful of the consequences. In fact, Ayn Rand has him say, I would be very happy if people find a better life in my building, in my housing project. But that's not why I'm building it. That's the distinction she's drawing exactly there. Consequences do matter. And negative consequences as much as positive consequences, such as sanctioning communists in the Soviet Union, such as sanctioning the altruism behind government-sponsored foreign aid. Yeah, you can't ignore that. You have to take into account all the facts and indeed the consequences. Principles are vital to understand that. And you can't dispense with principles in understanding that. We're not checking out on our principles. Quite the opposite. Principles are our means of making sure we get the outcome that we want, or at least getting the best shot at the outcome that we want.
Yeah, and now I was going to give a spoiler, but I'm going to hold off on spoilers. Let me jump to question number 5. Keep this conversation going because I have a little experience with this one. In some ways, I think most of us will. Leonard Peikoff was asked, as a restaurant manager, I often, out of self-interest, give employees praise for doing a good job. However, some young employees take my praise as a license to slack off work. How can I avoid this? That's interesting because it's a very practical question. The management style, there are clear solutions to this, but it ties in with the rest of the conversation. And Leonard Peikoff gives very practical advice. He starts out by saying, I guess you have to use the carrot and the stick. I would phrase your praise in a future inclusive way. That's, like if they do something good on Monday, I wouldn't say, well, that's really good. Goodbye. I would say, well, you really hustled that. I'm pleased with that. I always like to see that. And I look forward to seeing the way you handle that on Friday during our busy day.
Right. Good.
That way they know it's not just a one-shot deal.
Right.
This was interesting to me because I've been in conversations in person and on the social networks. Some people have the idea that you should never praise people unless they do something really exceptional. To which I've always said, if just the regular job that you've assigned to somebody, done competently, done right, done well, is not a cause for praise, then you are giving people the world's worst jobs. So I totally get part of the motivation, though, I think comes from people like this questioner who have seen, well, but if I praise people just for doing their regular job, I don't have anything extra to give to the people who are really exceptional. See, I like participation trophies, but they should be ribbons. They shouldn't be the big trophy. And also, if you tell people they're good, then they slack. Well, if that's happening, you need to find better ways to communicate to people that they're good.
Yes, sir. Yeah, there is the only kind of appreciation that I want is an informed appreciation.
Yes.
I can understand, especially the little qualifier, young people will take that as a license to slack off. Isn't that interesting? Because as we get older, we realize that the praise was not the goal and that wasn't sufficient. I'm not done with the job yet. I have to see it through. Mature people will understand those consequences, going back to consequences, and understand the relationship. And our praise obviously should vary depending on the true quality, and it should be fact-based. The praise that I give you, Robert, for doing a job, let's say you did a wonderful job on something, my praise should be concrete, factual, specific to what you did, informed, and proportionate. If you did something modest, I'll say thanks. If you did something really amazing and wonderful and it took creative thought or a lot of work or something, I will then give you higher praise or a higher reward for that. And I love the way he puts it, future inclusive. And that's really the way to look at it. Good start. Let's keep it up, folks.
Yes.
Yeah. I always appreciated bosses who would explain to me, if I was working in a factory and I was just stuffing some printed circuit board with a resistor and transistors, and I was doing that all day long, that would be a very boring, miserable task if I didn't know what the heck I was doing and why I was doing it. I always loved the supervisor that, well, see what you're doing, it fits in like this to the larger project and aims and goals. It's important that we do this for this reason. It's important we do it like this for that reason. Now I have the motivation base to keep it up and to get the job done.
Right. Yeah, to people who tell me that encouragement can be a bad thing, I only have one word: cheerleaders. I think we all need cheerleaders. And as you suggest, obviously, we need a little more substance than that.
Objectivism embraces the entire palette of human emotions and opposes emotional repression as such. On the other hand, I do want to say that objectivism has certain emotional leitmotifs. Envy is not, if it's the kind of envy that just simply motivates you, no. If it's the kind of envy that's destructive, I resent you for having that I don't have. I want to destroy that rather than let you have that. That is a negative emotion, and objectivism really is not big on that kind of envy. No, it's bad. One emotion that we think is really, really, really good is gratitude, admiration, praise. Objectivism is all about that. And in our world where mysticism and altruism and collectivism have dominated, that is what's missing. The praising, appreciating, and rewarding the individual for his or her effort. That counts far more than any kind of negative sanction. Negative sanction anyway. Now, it's true, if the young workers are slacking off, you got to use a bit of the stick as well as the carrot, kick them in the tail to motivate them. On the other hand, that praise in itself is far more important. Acknowledging the good is far more important for me, selfishly, to experience than any criticism, any negative. Honestly, it's that praise for the positive that is more important for me psychologically, for me selfishly, psychologically, to say, Robert, I really admire the way you did that. It inspired me. It made a difference to the outcome. That is what counts in life. Objectivism, envy, not good. Gratitude, real good. Big thumbs up. So I would express it in terms of emotional leitmotif is the best way I have of putting it. Although emotions are all automatic. There are no emotional shoulds. Don't feel bad if you have a certain emotion. Experience the full range of emotions. On the other hand, certain emotions are indicative of something not so good, and certain emotions are indicative of a healthy, positive response to values. And admiration, love, and gratitude are our emotions.
Yeah, as we become philosophically astute, we get so good at seeing what's wrong in the world that it feels big. But one of my favorite quotes from Leonard Peikoff, from Dr. Peikoff, and I can do this from memory, is the first duty of justice. And I love that he uses the word duty there. He doesn't literally mean duty, but he's intending to push this as this is core. The first duty of justice is to acknowledge and defend the good. And he talks after that quote at length about the primacy of values, about the primacy of the good, how evil is derivative. It can't survive on its own. No, what matters is the good, the creators, the producers. And that means anybody who produces more than he consumes, who actually brings into the world values.
I say I agree thoroughly and 100%. And I spent almost 18 years as a public prosecutor sanctioning negatively sanctioning the evil. So although I made it a profession of mine for many years to negatively sanction the evil, I myself am well aware that acknowledging and praising and admiring and feeling gratitude for the positive is far more selfish, far more important. I mean, it's
Well,
not even
to borrow a phrase from the protagonist of Atlas Shrugged, you have cleared the way many times over. So the work you did was crucial, absolutely crucial. Let me give just a bit of question number 6 here. We're running long, but
yeah.
Leonard Peikoff was asked, I want to create my own films. However, I am blatant about my philosophical outlook. I will be barred from any future work in the entertainment industry and my career will end. Is this cowardice? And just real quick, Leonard Peikoff says, if the situation is as you describe, and again, I want to get this out there for folks who still feel it's a little bit floating. If the situation is as you described, that if you become known, you'll get no jobs in the whole field, well, then it's not cowardice not to become known. If they really have the power and you are helpless. Now, in a case like that, you can either stay silent without getting so much knowledge and savings as you can, or you can quit and try to start elsewhere. It would be best to start on your own or with some small independent. Try to get some independent financing or find the rare individual who has clout in the industry and who wants to back you. Now, unquote, Leonard Peikoff goes on, but I love that his answer questions the premise of the question. Yeah. That it may well be that the entertainment industry is so corrupt that if you let people know in any way, well, I'm pro-reason, I'm pro-capitalist, I'm an individualist, sure, a lot of people would hear that and shut you down, but that does not mean that's the end of the road and the only approach.
Exactly right. I've known writers, I've known actors who faced real discrimination for their beliefs. It's real, it happens. On the other hand, in a free society, you have other options. Now, it's true, as freedom withers on the vine, we have fewer and fewer options. You know, if it's a government agency you're working for and they're the exclusive people doing the job, and it's a job that needs doing, even though the government has taken it over, then yeah, your life will be hell. You may have to avoid the task altogether. Yes. And, you know, those avenues close down as an economy gets more and more socialized. But the real essence here is don't panic about having to advocate. If what you want to do is be an actor, then be an actor. You don't need necessarily to put your politics front and center if what you want to do is be an actor. Even if what you want to do is write detective stories or thriller novels, you don't need to put objectivism front and center. And if they're going to penalize you for your ideas, you have no duty to tell them at all. They don't. You're under no obligation to let anyone know what your politics, for example, are, or what your religious views are. That's you know, you don't owe people the information in your head, except under specific contexts, which you're morally, I think, obliged to do so. But those are the that's the narrow category. Ideas are not there to create a problem for you. The ideas are there to be a tool for you. Insofar as someone's going to be irrational about your objectivism, no reason to even bring up the fact that you're an objectivist.
Right. And yes, absolutely. And there are people who have had enormous integrity and have figured out how to leverage that into a career that works. For years, John Stossel was a mainstream reporter, and he finally got to the point where he couldn't work with any of the big net, but he still produces content. It's brought him enormous success, enormous wealth. He gets the ideas out there. I wouldn't call him an objectivist, but he's a man of reason. He is a man who's pro-liberty. He is not Tucker Carlson. And you don't have to be Tucker Carlson to make it in this world. And I bring that up because, yes, we are running long. And I've got to say, coming up in less than an hour, James, you're going to have the opportunity to tell us, wait a minute, Tucker Carlson was the biggest voice on Fox News, the most successful voice on Fox News. Well, he finally got thrown off, but it looks like Elon Musk found his spatula and scraped him up off the sidewalk, and now he's on Twitter, of all places. Twitter. So I want to hear that. I want to hear what you've got to say about that. You and Nikos will have to say about that.
Yeah, Nikos and I, in less than an hour, will be discussing Tucker Carlson's first video released on Twitter.
So, folks, join us in less than an hour on our YouTube channel The Ayn Rand Center UK, that's going to be good. The daily objective number, my God, 768. So cool. And more good stuff is coming up. If you heard Monday's show, you know. Can you imagine daily collective episodes? Things are only going to get better. One more thing before we go, James, I've got to say, I'm looking forward to my show tomorrow because I'm going to be talking Ted Lasso. If anybody hasn't seen the series Ted Lasso, there will be some minor spoilers, but I'm going to try to keep it light. So all sorts of good stuff coming up. James, thank you for an outstanding conversation. We've talked career and professions before, but I think we brought a few things out today, valuable and that we haven't said before.
Thank you. I can't wait to hear you on Ted Lasso. I really can't. I love the show, and I know you're going to have some powerful insights. So everyone, check it out.
Thank you very much, folks. Thank you for joining us. Have an outstanding 55 minutes and join us at 6 p.m. UK time, 1 o'clock on the East Coast, 10 a.m. in the Pacific. Have an outstanding day, and whatever you do, keep it real.